From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Parashat Bhaalotecha, the Bloodless War. We have in our Parasha magnificent description, build-up of the marching forward of the Jewish people to conquer the land of Israel. How was it envisioned that the Jewish people would conquer the land of Israel? Well, Moshe says, Vayibin so Aaron, as the ark would travel, the cloud would lift, the people would march forward, and Moshe said, Kum Hashem, rise up, O God, may your enemies disperse, may your enemies of the Jewish people who are the enemies of God, let them run away from you, God, as the Jewish people march forward. This prayer of Moshe seems to be the hope for the Jewish war, the Jewish value of war, the Jewish concept of war. When Jews are to inherit the land of Israel, that which was promised them by God. When the Jews are to displace those who, according to Leviticus, who were sinful and therefore did not merit to continue to live in the land, his vision was that the Jewish people would march forward and the enemy would simply disperse. This vision, this hope, is expressed in a promise as part of the covenant with God. In Parashat Bhaalotecha, there we learn that if indeed, if the Jews will walk in the ways of God's commandments, then what happens? You will chase your enemy, and they will fall in front of you. 5 will chase 100. And 100 of you can chase 10,000. And the enemies will simply fall in front of you. If we look in Tanakh and we ask, did this ever play out? Did the Jews ever win in this sort of way? We know the famous story of Jericho, the very first battle, emblematic of how things were supposed to be, had the Jews not sinned with Achan when they took from the spoils. But there in Jericho, enemies dispersed as the walls crumbled, and the enemy was terrified as we came through. I'd like to look at some other cases as well, where we see that this vision of Moshe and the vision of the covenant with God in Bhaalotecha was played out in Jewish history. If we look in the prophet Shmuel, Shmuel was an idyllic leader, a leader who was a man of God, prophet, and also a leader of Israel. So what did he do? He offered an offering, a sacrifice, which is a form of prayer. He called out, he screamed out to God on behalf of the Jewish people. God answered him. As Shmuel offered the offering, the Philistines came forward to attack the Jews. A great voice, a great thunder came forward from God. It confused the enemy. They fell in front of the Jewish people. There we have Shmuel fighting an idyllic war. David, a little less so. He fights real wars. But we do find in Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel chapter 10, there it does mention in his various fights that they gathered to fight against Israel, and then Vayanas Aram mipnei Israel. Aram ran away from the Jewish people. In the book of Kings, the great Sancherib, who boasted of conquering all the cities and all of the city-states and all of the countries around the Middle East. And indeed, we have archaeological evidence of his boast in writing, where he boasted of destroying all the cities, but not Jerusalem. Jerusalem he could not destroy, because that night, when King Hezekiah prayed to God, it was promised that God would save him, and indeed, an angel came out. Vayach machaneh Ashur me'ash monim. The angel came and fought for us. No Jewish swords were lifted. We came that morning, and there the soldiers, the enemy, had died. This is a war in which the Jewish soldiers lift no finger. What about in the end of days? What is the vision of what will happen in the end of days? We have in the Tehillim, the Psalm of Monday, nations of the world come to Jerusalem, according to one interpretation. And what happens when they get there in Jerusalem? Nivhalu nechpazu. They are just shocked, they are awestruck by Jerusalem. Chapter 48. They tremble there like a woman in labor. It breaks the boats, their fear. Just looking at Jerusalem, just the awesomeness of Jerusalem breaks their boats, it attacks them. They break down as they see the Jewish grandeur, the godly grandeur of Jerusalem. What about in the end of days? What's the vision in the end of days? Are the Jews going to have to kill their enemies? No. In the end of days, enemies are going to come and attack a peace-loving Jewish people who are sitting on their land. And then, v'ra'ashu mipanai, there'll be this tremendous earthquake, this tremendous noise, and everybody, the animals, everyone will be terrified. And then they will be attacked. The enemy will fall. Chapter 38 in Yechezkel, or in Zechariah, chapter 14. This will be the plague which God will inflict on those who come to attack Jerusalem. Their skin will fall, and their eyes will fall in their sockets. Their tongue will cling to their palate. On that day, the confusion of the horses will be great, and no one will know what to do. The idea of the Jewish victory is not one in which a Jewish soldier lifts a sword against the enemy. The idea of the Jewish victory is the Jewish people find their rightful place in the land of Israel. The enemies flee. I think it was Golda Meir who said that she could forgive Anwar Sadat and other Arab leaders for what they had done to our people, but she would never be able to forgive them for that she made our soldiers lift their swords, that she turned our boys into soldiers and fighters. That's not our ideal. We see here in Tanakh, we see here in this Parsha, we see here in Moshe's prayer, the Jewish ideal is that a Jewish soldier goes out to battle, and it's God who does the fighting. The Jewish people can come and rest in their rightful home, and never having lifted a sword at all. We know that when it comes to Yaakov, our forefather, when he battled and fought, had to fight and had to confront Esav, he was Vayira Yaakov Ma'od Vayetzalo. He was very concerned and he was very distressed. Concerned, worried, distressed. Why all these expressions? And the rabbis say he was concerned that he would have to kill Esav, but he was also concerned. He was concerned that he would be killed, but he was also concerned that he would have to kill. The Jewish ideal is that we wouldn't have to kill anyone, but rather that a Jew could simply live peacefully in their land, and that others would appreciate that indeed God's people have returned to the land that God had promised them. This is the Jewish ideal. This is the Jewish value. There's no Jewish value of war, of killing others. God forbid. The idea is the Jewish people can simply come to their place. But God gave us a strange mission in life. And that is to always be those who come from somewhere else. Abraham came from somewhere else to come to the land of Israel, to be a stranger in a foreign land. The Jews came from Egypt to come, and they had to conquer the land of Israel. After 2,000 years, you have to come back. Many Jews had continuously lived there, but many of us had came back after 2,000 years and had to come into a place. And people accuse us of being listim, we're stealing the land. And it's very simple. It's not our idea to displace anyone. It's not our idea to kill anyone, God forbid. Our idea is simply to come home. And as we come home, we would hope that the nations of the world would stand back and say, wow, God's word is being fulfilled after 2,000 years. Make way for the Jewish people. Make way for a people who are finally coming home. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth El congregation for our discussion of Parashat Bhaalotecha. Join us each week here as we discuss our Parsha, and you can look at our archives of previous years as well. Thank you to Jason Lefkowitz for making today's presentation possible. And thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth El congregation here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.